They laughed when she stood up and walked away from me in the Christmas lounge. The words slipped out before he even realized he'd said them, quiet enough to be swallowed by the clinking glasses around him, but loud enough for the banker at the next table to smirk. People actually laughed, right there in front of the garlands and poinsettias, while the blind date he'd been told was a perfect holiday match shook her head and hurried off. They called him just hotel staff, like that was all he'd ever be, like he didn't belong anywhere near their polished marble and gold leaf ornaments. He didn't chase after her. He just picked up the little cookie tin he'd brought and walked back toward the service corridor. And by the end of the night, the same crowd would watch a powerful woman lean close and whisper a question none of them could have imagined. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And stay with me, because this story isn't about a man being rejected. It's about what happens when the people who laugh first are the ones who fall silent last. He stepped into the back hallway without a word, breath steady, shoulders low, refusing to carry the shame they wanted to pin on him. The sting was real, but his calm was deeper. Everyone saw a man turned away. No one saw the man who refused to break. He went straight to the small break room where his daughter was drawing, letting the warmth of her quiet presence settle the bruise beneath his ribs. Rowan looked up, eyes hopeful, waiting to hear how it went. He smiled gently, placing the cookie tin beside her, without explaining why it was still full. The hotel's muffled music echoed faintly in the ceiling vents. From above, the gala floor shimmered with luxury, and he knew he'd be returning there soon, not for celebration, but because work didn't pause for heartbreak. He put on his gloves and adjusted his ID badge, grounding himself in the one truth that never shifted. Dignity didn't depend on who accepted him. It depended on who he chose to be. And he'd spent too many years learning how to stand still in storms to let a blind date rattle him. He checked his radio, listening to a report about a flickering sound panel in the VIP ballroom upstairs. He'd need to fix it before the evening program started. Something simple, something predictable, the kind of task that gave quiet structure to a life rebuilt after too many shattered pieces. He walked calmly toward the elevators, passing the spot where Marcus, the banker, had watched him get rejected. Marcus gave him a pity smirk, as if expecting him to avoid eye contact. Instead, he nodded once and kept walking. Upstairs, the air changed. The carpet grew thicker, the lights softer, the guests more polished. Harper Vale, the attorney hosting the private Christmas donor event, moved through the lobby with crisp authority, not even noticing the maintenance worker, walking toward the faulty panel. Her niece, a small girl in a red velvet dress, held her hand tightly. Rowan would have loved the decorations up here, crystal snowflakes hanging like frozen stars, soft piano music threading the air. But Rowan belonged in the world downstairs, the world where hard work mattered more than watching eyes. The sound panel flickered again. He knelt to open the casing, posture calm, movement steady. This corridor wasn't his world, but his hands knew exactly what to do. Each wire, each circuit, each tiny adjustment drew him deeper into the rhythm he trusted, the rhythm he had learned long before he ever wore a hotel uniform. Behind him, the donors gathered, their chatter bright and warm, unaware that the man kneeling in the corner once handled emergencies far more complex than malfunctioning electronics. No one saw the quiet precision in his hands. No one wondered why a maintenance worker moved like someone trained to stay calm under pressure. He heard the start of the children's choir, their soft voices rising through the ballroom. He closed the panel and tested it twice before standing. Everything worked perfectly now. The event could proceed without interruption. He turned back toward the elevator to check on Rowan before heading to his next task. But before he took a step, he heard a cough, sharp, small, and unmistakably distressed. A child's cough. It cut through the music like a warning. He paused. More coughing followed. Harsher, strained. A woman's voice snapped in panic. Then a sound he recognized from 100 emergencies, the desperate attempt of someone unable to breathe. He moved toward the ballroom without thinking, instincts taking over long before fear or hesitation could form. He didn't know who was in trouble or what went wrong, but the urgency in the air was too real to ignore. He pushed through the gathering crowd. Lucy, the little girl in the red velvet dress, collapsed near the front row, and the room froze. He didn't. He stepped forward. And everything he'd been hiding from this world, the training, the steady hands, the knowledge, rose quietly to the surface, ready for the moment everyone else would later swear they'd never forget. He stepped forward before anyone else even understood what was happening. The choir stumbled to a halt, their small voices fading into startled whispers as the guests surged back, forming a trembling circle around the girl on the floor. Lucy lay on her side, her curls sprawled across the polished marble, chest barely lifting, breath rattling like a trapped whisper fighting to escape. Harper dropped to her knees instantly, hands shaking as she lifted the child into her arms, calling her name again and again, hoping for a response that didn't come. The room looked to the nearest donors, to the arriving staff, to anyone who seemed capable of fixing what they couldn't understand. But no one moved with purpose. No one stepped into the fear. He did. The moment he knelt beside the child, the world around him sharpened into stillness. This wasn't a ballroom anymore. It wasn't a moment unfolding in front of people who barely knew his name. It was a scene he had lived too many times before, when seconds meant survival and hesitation meant consequences he wasn't willing to witness ever again. Harper stared at him, startled, defensive, overwhelmed. "Please, somebody call an ambulance," she shouted, not realizing her voice shook more from fear than authority. "It's already coming," someone answered, though no one had actually made the call yet. He leaned in closer, checking Lucy's airway with efficient movements that contrasted the chaos erupting around them. "She's not breathing right," Harper said, voice cracking. "Her inhaler. She used it before we left home, but it didn't—" Her breath hitched, and he could hear the panic tightening her words. "I need space," he said quietly. Not loud, not commanding, but steady enough that people instinctively stepped back. Harper hesitated for only a second before trusting that voice. Just enough for him to gently shift the girl into a better position and assess the problem more clearly. Her lungs were fighting, but the struggle wasn't responding to the inhaler. This wasn't simple asthma. It was something layered, something he recognized instantly from years spent stabilizing soldiers who'd inhaled particulate debris or chemical irritants. Her chest movements were uneven, her airflow obstructed by something swelling rapidly inside. He pressed 2 fingers lightly under her jawline, listening to the faintest vibration with each breath. He knew this rhythm. He'd treated it before, and he knew exactly what had to be done to keep her airway from closing completely before help arrived. Harper watched him, confusion and disbelief mixing with hope she didn't dare voice. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Helping her breathe," he said. Marcus appeared behind the front row, pushing aside guests with a self-important urgency, as if his presence alone could solve things. "What are you doing?" he demanded, recognizing the man from the lounge. "Get away from her! You're maintenance! Let the professionals handle this!" His words cracked through the air like a bad omen, but no one followed his lead. They only stared at the man kneeling calmly beside the girl, hands moving with quiet certainty. He ignored Marcus completely. Instead, he gripped a small emergency tool from his belt, something meant for cutting zip ties or wires, nothing medical, and used the thin handle to adjust Lucy's jaw and neck angle with surgical precision. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Lucy's airflow shifted, not enough to sustain her, but enough to buy seconds, precious seconds. "Who are you?" Harper asked, her voice breaking on the question. He didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. Not when. Lucy's breath stuttered again, her chest trembling with the effort. Instead, he reached for a water bottle someone abandoned on a nearby table and twisted the cap off. The guests murmured uncertainly, unsure what he was doing with something so ordinary in a moment so critical. He tore a small strip from the corner of a linen napkin, rolled it tightly, and pressed it against the airflow path, adjusting the moisture to reduce swelling temporarily. It was a technique he hadn't used since the field, a temporary, improvised method for airway stabilization. But it worked again. Lucy's breath caught, then steadied just enough to keep her conscious. The room gasped collectively, like they all inhaled the same breath she finally managed to take. He glanced over at the frozen crowd. "Someone call the paramedics now," he said. This time, an older man hurried out his phone. Harper reached for Lucy's hand, crying softly as the girl's eyes fluttered but didn't fully open, checked her pulse again, watching carefully. Everything he did was deliberate. Every movement came from years of training he never talked about, because life had taken him far from that world, into a simpler one where Rowan's safety mattered more than any rank he once held. But some instincts never faded. The ballroom, once filled with polished confidence and expensive indifference, now hung on every move he made. Even Marcus stepped back, face blanching, as he realized the gravity of what was unfolding right in front of him. Harper's voice trembled. How did you know what to do?" He met her eyes for a brief moment. "I've seen this before." The paramedics burst through the doors. They rushed to Lucy, lifting her gently onto the stretcher, and one of them froze mid-check. Recognition flickered across the medic's face. Brief, startled, respectful. "Sir, is that you?" he asked quietly. The room fell silent again. He didn't answer. He just stepped back, letting them take over, his hands finally still, but his pulse steady. The victory strategy had already begun its slow turn. Tonight's humiliation had cracked open. The truth would follow. The medic's quiet recognition hung in the air long after they wheeled Lucy toward the elevator. Guests who minutes earlier sipped mulled wine and debated holiday vacations now stood frozen, watching the man they'd dismissed minutes ago step back into the shadows of the ballroom. No one laughed now. No one whispered, just hotel staff. The room felt different, charged, uncertain, as if the script everyone expected had been ripped away. He didn't wait for applause or questions. He simply adjusted his gloves, nodded once to the paramedic who'd paused in surprise, and started toward the corridor that led back downstairs. Harper stood rooted in place, torn between the instinct to stay with her niece and the need to understand what she'd just seen. For a moment, the attorney with the perfect posture and flawless control seemed small. Someone trying to make sense of a world that suddenly didn't match its own rules. "Ma'am, you should come with us," one of the medics urged. Harper blinked, torn, then nodded and followed the stretcher. But she glanced back. She watched him leave. And something in her expression, confusion, gratitude, guilt, suggested tonight wasn't finished. The donors slowly drifted into soft murmurs. Guests who once looked through him now looked at each other, replaying what they'd witnessed. Marcus remained the only unmoving figure, jaw clenched, eyes narrow. He'd built his confidence on hierarchy, on knowing exactly who stood above him and who stood below. And the man he'd mocked earlier no longer fit into the bottom category. He walked briskly down the corridor, the sounds of the gala fading behind him. He needed to check on Rowan. Everything in him shifted when he stabilized Lucy. Old instincts awakened, muscle memory, flooding his body with impressions he'd buried years ago. But he pushed it down. His life wasn't up there under the chandeliers. It was down here, where Rowan drew pictures and waited for him to come back with stories about Christmas lights and silly hotel mishaps. As he stepped into the service level, the world softened. The smell of hot cocoa from the employee lounge drifted out, and muffled laughter from the kitchen staff reminded him that the hotel's heart didn't beat in the ballroom. It beat down here. He opened the door to the break room quietly. Rowan was on the carpet, coloring beside her wooden snowflake, humming softly to herself. When she looked up and saw him, her entire face lit with pure, unfiltered joy. "You're back," she whispered, like it was the best news she'd heard all night. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm back." She didn't ask about the rejection. She didn't ask why he looked tired. She didn't even ask about the commotion upstairs. She trusted that if there was something he wanted to tell her, he would. And that kind of trust carried more weight than any insult thrown earlier. He sat down with her, letting her show him the lines she'd added to the snowflake. She explained how she was trying to make it match the one her mother had kept on the tree every year. Her voice trembled slightly. She didn't talk about her mother often. He listened, breathing slowly, letting the small moment anchor him. But the moment didn't last. The door pushed open without warning. Marcus stepped in. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He barged inside like he owned the floor, his cologne preceding him in a sharp, intrusive cloud. Rowan froze. The man's eyes swept the room before landing on him with sour determination. "So that's where you've been hiding," Marcus said, voice low, but scorched with resentment. "You think just because you played hero upstairs, you can pretend you belong on the gala floor?" He stood up slowly, positioning himself between Marcus and Rowan. "I'm working," he said quietly. Marcus scoffed. "Working? Please. You were pretending. I saw the way you handled that kid like some kind of trained specialist. You're not maintenance. You're something else, and I'm going to find out exactly what." Rowan's fingers tightened around her father's sleeve. "What does that have to do with you?" he asked, tone still calm. "Everything," Marcus snapped. "You embarrassed me, in front of everyone. Do you know what that does to my reputation?" He didn't answer. Some men believed reputation was built on who they stepped on. He'd learned differently. Rowan tugged gently at his shirt, sensing the rising tension. Marcus leaned in. "People like you should stay where you belong. Don't get ideas. You saved one kid, and now everyone looks at you like you're some kind of miracle worker." "I wasn't looking for attention," he replied, voice steady. "That's the problem," Marcus hissed. "You got it anyway." Before the confrontation could tip further, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A younger staff member appeared at the door, wide-eyed. "They're talking about you upstairs, the donors, the medics. They said you saved her life." His voice carried more awe than fear. Marcus shot the staffer a lethal glare, but the kid ignored him entirely. He sighed inwardly. This was exactly what he didn't want. Attention, whispers, speculation. Yet the moment Marcus tried to strip away his dignity again, fate insisted on handing it back in front of witnesses, exactly what public exposure demanded. He crouched beside Rowan again. "Finish your snowflake," he whispered. She nodded. Because whatever happened next in the gala, the truth was rising, and the people who laughed earlier were beginning to fall silent. He watched Rowan's small shoulders relax again as she bent over her, wooden snowflake, the soft scratch of her colored pencil settling the air. But inside him, a storm simmered. The encounter with Marcus wasn't new. Men like him had been circling his life ever since he traded a military uniform for a maintenance badge. Still, tonight the sting carried a different weight. Not because Marcus mattered, but because Rowan had watched enough people underestimate the man raising her. He wanted something better for her than the echoes of someone else's arrogance. He took a breath, grounding himself the way he always did. Slow inhale, slower exhale. Then he stood, brushing off his gloves as if shedding the residue of Marcus's words. "I'll be right outside," he murmured to Rowan. She nodded without looking up, trusting him in the quiet, instinctive way children do when their world feels stable as long as a parent is close. Stepping back into the hallway, he closed the door gently behind him. The muted hum of holiday activity drifted through the service level, but the atmosphere had changed. Staff members gave him subtle glances, not curious, not judgmental, but something closer to awe. Word had spread faster than he expected. A child collapsing at an upscale event would have been a spectacle on any night. Saving that same child with improvisation and precision? That became a story before he even reached the elevator. He didn't want a story. He wanted calm. He made his way toward the stairwell, opting for the quieter climb over the crowded lift. The rhythmic steps helped ease the adrenaline still threading through him. When he reached the landing near the ballroom level, he could already hear the murmurs, soft, urgent, intent. People talking, guessing, assigning meaning to actions they didn't understand. He stepped through the backstage entrance, keeping to the shadows. From there, he could see the guests gathered in small clusters around the periphery of the room, whispering with the kind of intensity reserved for scandal or miracles. Harper hadn't returned yet, and her absence weighed on the atmosphere like a pause before the next movement of a symphony. He moved toward the sound panel he'd fixed earlier, checking it out of habit. But the panel wasn't the source of the flicker now. It was the people. The entire crowd felt unsettled, not by danger, but by the realization that their assumptions were wrong. They had drawn a straight line between uniform and value, between class and competence, between a man's job and his worth. And tonight, that line snapped. A pair of donors stood closest to the panel. He caught fragments. How did he know? "I've never seen someone move like that." Harper grabbed his arm afterward. "Did you see?" He must have been something before this. He pretended to inspect the panel, though it worked perfectly. He wasn't hiding from attention. He was avoiding its weight. He'd spent too many years keeping his past. buried under layers of discipline, guilt, and an unwavering need to protect his daughter's sense of normalcy. The last thing he wanted was an audience dragging him back toward a life he walked away from. As he moved toward the curtains, someone stepped into his path, one of the head servers, breathless, trying to keep his voice low. "They want you on the floor," he whispered. He frowned. "Why?" "Because they're asking about you. Everyone. They saw what happened. They saw you fix Lucy's breathing. They're waiting for you to come out." He shook his head. "I'm not part of the event." "That's the problem," the server replied softly. "Tonight you were." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked past the curtain. The choir had returned, huddled together near the stage stairs, their young faces carrying traces of lingering fear. The pianist whispered reassurances to them, promising the show could continue once the room settled. The musicians waited with instruments lowered, unsure if the performance would resume at all. He scanned the ballroom. Marcus stood near the bar, jaw clenched, but voice animated as he tried to reassert the version of reality he preferred. One where he was right, where the man who saved a child didn't upend the established order. He stepped closer to the curtain's edge but remained in shadow. Marcus's voice was clear enough to catch. "He's not a doctor," he declared to anyone listening. "He works with tools, not people. Probably saw something on YouTube and got lucky." A guest challenged him. "You saw the paramedic recognize him?" "Coincidence," Marcus snapped. "People like him want attention, hero types, pretend types." He exhaled slowly. Marcus was scrambling because the ground beneath him was shifting. This part of the victory strategy, the tension before public exposure, was unfolding naturally without him lifting a finger. A movement at the far entrance caught his attention. Harper had returned. She entered like a woman moving through a fog, expression still pale from fear, but eyes laser-focused. Her blazer was slightly wrinkled from kneeling on the floor, and she moved with urgency that had nothing to do with professionalism. Her gaze swept the room before landing on the server nearest her. "Where is he?" she asked. The question sliced through the ballroom like a new chord added to a quiet score. Conversations dimmed, heads turned, and Marcus stiffened. The server pointed toward the curtains. Their eyes met. The attorney who had barely noticed him minutes before now looked at him as if he held answers she desperately needed. She crossed the room toward him, each step dissolving another layer of the class divide. When she stopped in front of him, the entire ballroom held its breath. "Please," she said softly, "talk to me." He nodded once, and the next movement of the night began. Her voice didn't carry authority this time. It carried something heavier, fear, gratitude, and the unsteady realization that the man standing in the backstage shadows wasn't the person she thought he was. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He simply waited, letting the noise of the ballroom fade behind them. Harper steadied herself before speaking again, lowering her tone so only he could hear. They said you saved her life," she whispered. He nodded, not out of pride, but because denying the truth would be pointless. "She needed help fast." Harper swallowed hard. "The paramedics told me if you hadn't stepped in when you did..." Her voice cracked. "I don't even want to finish that sentence." She looked down briefly, then back up with eyes that searched him with a new urgency. "Who are you?" He didn't answer immediately. He shifted, leaning slightly against the backstage wall, hands resting calmly at his sides. He wouldn't lie. But tonight wasn't the night to open the vault he'd sealed. After leaving the Air Force, Still, Harper deserved part of the truth, not the past that haunted him, just the present reality. "I work maintenance," he said gently. "That's all I am here." "You're not," she said quickly. "You're something else. I saw it. Everyone saw it." He exhaled through his nose, quietly. "I've worked under pressure before." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a denial. But Harper understood enough to see the cracks in the story he lived for years. Before she could respond, footsteps approached, soft, hesitant. A cluster of donors drifted toward the curtain, looking for answers. Harper straightened instinctively, her lawyer's instinct sensing the shift in attention from private moment to public scrutiny. She gave him a small nod, signaling that she understood this wasn't the place to pry further. But people didn't wait for permission. The first donor stepped forward. "Sir, excuse me," the man said, clearing his throat, as if he wasn't sure how to address a person he'd ignored only an hour earlier. "We just wanted to thank you. What you did for that little girl." Another donor added, "I've never seen anything like it. You were steady, like you knew exactly what to do." The words made him uncomfortable. He wasn't here for applause. "Anyone would have helped," he said. "No," Harper interrupted softly. "Not like that. Not the way you did." Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This is ridiculous. You're all acting like he's some kind of expert. He's maintenance. He's staff. Stop elevating him beyond what he is." The room stilled. The donors stiffened. Harper's eyes hardened. This was the moment where victory strategy began sharpening its edges. Public exposure through conflict. He didn't say a word, but the contrast between the man who saved a child and the man who mocked him painted itself clearly across the faces in the ballroom. A woman from the donor group crossed her arms. "He saved a life, Marcus. What exactly did you do tonight besides sneer?" Marcus's cheeks reddened, but he doubled down. "People like him want attention. Don't you see? He's playing you." Harper stepped in before anyone else could. "Marcus, stop," she said calmly. But calm from her didn't soften. It cut. "You didn't see what I saw. You didn't kneel beside my niece. You didn't hear her breath fading." Her voice trembled, but her stance didn't. "He did," Marcus scoffed. "You're being emotional." "Of course I'm being emotional," she snapped, composure cracking just enough to show the raw motherly fear she felt in those critical minutes. "I thought I was about to lose her." Her admission hung in the air, shifting the room's energy. He didn't move from his spot, but the attention settled fully on him now. An involuntary spotlight. The exact type of public shift the victory strategy required. Still, he remained steady, posture open, hands relaxed at his sides. Pressure never rattled him. It only clarified what mattered. Harper turned back to him. "Could you just tell me how you knew what to do? Was it experience? Training?" He searched her face, the genuine worry, the sincerity, the need for understanding. Then he glanced at the growing audience behind her. Too many ears, too many guesses. He wouldn't unpack his past here. "I've been in situations like that before," he said quietly. "You learn to react fast." Harper didn't push further. Something in his steady tone convinced her this wasn't the time, but it wasn't enough for Marcus. "That's not an answer," Marcus snapped. "You're hiding something." The guests bristled, tired of the banker's arrogance. One man, clearly a long-time donor, stepped forward. "Even if he is hiding something, maybe it's because it's none of your business." The crowd murmured agreement. Marcus's jaw worked angrily. "You're all fools. He's manipulating this situation." He ignored the accusation. Instead, he redirected his attention toward Harper. "How's she doing?" Harper blinked, touched that his first question wasn't about himself or reputation, but about the child. "Stable," she said softly. "The medics think she'll be okay. They want to run tests at the hospital." Relief softened the tension at his shoulders. He nodded once. Harper hesitated, then stepped closer. "Will you stay? I want to thank you properly, and I think the others deserve to hear what happened from you, not from rumors." He didn't answer immediately. Staying meant stepping deeper into a spotlight he didn't want. But leaving would let Marcus shape the narrative. And public exposure required witness, required reversal, required truth, or at least the beginnings of it. "I'll stay," he said finally, and Harper exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the EIST moment Lucy collapsed. As the donors formed a loose semicircle around them, the tension shifted, not toward humiliation, but toward revelation. Marcus looked cornered. The crowd looked curious. Harper looked changed, and for the first time tonight, he wasn't the man people dismissed. He was the man everyone was watching. He didn't step into the semicircle as a speaker or a guest. He stepped in because walking away would have given Marcus the last word, and that wasn't something he intended to leave behind, not when a child's life had been in his hands minutes earlier. He stood with quiet steadiness, the kind of composure that didn't demand attention, but naturally drew it. The donors waited, their faces softened by concern and curiosity. Harper watched him closely, as if trying to piece together the puzzle he carried silently. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said, keeping his voice level. Lucy needed her airway stabilized. "I recognized what was happening and responded. That's all." One woman frowned. "But how did you recognize it so quickly?" He hesitated, not because he couldn't answer, but because every word he shared about his past chipped away at the normal life he had built. "Experience," he said finally. "And training." Marcus snorted loudly. "There it is, vague statements, no real explanation. You're playing the hero for attention." The donors bristled. Harper stepped closer, her jaw tightening. "Marcus, enough." "No," Marcus shot back. "I'm sick of everyone treating him like some decorated expert when we don't even know who he is. He works maintenance. He fixes light bulbs. You all saw him earlier. He was rejected in the lounge because he showed up to a blind date in a uniform." A ripple of discomfort moved through the group. He didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He stood still, letting Marcus's words spill into the air, knowing that silence often spoke louder than protest. Harper's voice lowered to something sharper than anger. "And yet, the man you're insulting is the reason my niece is breathing tonight. So maybe the uniform isn't the measure you think it is." Marcus opened his mouth again, but a clear voice cut him off before he could speak. "Sir," one of the paramedics called from the ballroom entrance. The crowd turned. The young medic who'd recognized him earlier approached with careful steps, holding the strap of his medical bag like it anchored him. He glanced at Marcus, then at the donors, then finally at the man standing beside Harper. "Just wanted to give an update," the medic said, addressing Harper respectfully. "Your niece is stabilizing well. We're taking her to the children's hospital now. She kept her airway open the whole way, because of what he did." Harper's eyes softened. A tremor of relief ran through her shoulders. The donors sighed, tension thinning like melting frost. Then the medic turned toward him and lowered his voice slightly. "It's been a long time, sir." The murmurs erupted instantly. Marcus paled. "You know him," the medic nodded. Everyone in my unit knew him. He taught half of us emergency airway protocols before he—" The medic stopped, glancing at him for permission to continue. He offered none. Before he left, the donors stared, stunned. Whispered theories flew. Doctor, officer, specialist, something higher. Harper's gaze deepened with understanding, not shock. Marcus stepped back. "Are you kidding me?" The medic ignored him. He looked directly at him with a respect that cut clean through the ballroom. "You saved my first patient in the field. You were the reason I didn't freeze my first week. Seeing you here," his voice cracked, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." He shifted uncomfortably, feeling the crowd's attention tightening around him like a spotlight he never wanted. "I'm just doing my job," said quietly. The medic smiled softly. "No, you were doing what you've always done. You stepped in because no one else could." He turned back to Harper. "Your niece is alive because he knew exactly what to do the moment she fell." When the medic left, the room felt heavier, not with fear, but with truth. The donors didn't move. Marcus looked sick, and Harper watched him with a softness she couldn't hide. He could feel the shift. This was the moment the victory strategy required, the widening gap between public perception and private reality. The truth was rising, not through bragging, but through witness. Through someone who'd seen him before the world labeled him with a maintenance badge. Harper stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You trained medics?" He shook his head, not in denial, but in quiet refusal to reopen that chapter. "It was a long time ago." "But you saved her," she whispered. "You saved Lucy." He didn't look away. "I just did what I could." She took a breath that trembled at the edges. "Can you come with me, just for a moment?" He didn't want to. Not because he feared attention, but because this world, the one filled with chandeliers and curated smiles, wasn't his. But Harper wasn't asking as an attorney or as a high-status host. She was asking as a woman who had watched her niece suffocate in her arms. He nodded once. She guided him through the crowd. The donors watched with something between respect and realization. Marcus pressed himself against the bar, avoiding eye contact entirely. As they walked, Harper spoke softly. "I need to tell you something. Before tonight, I wouldn't have noticed you. Not on purpose. I just lived in a world where everything runs smoothly, and people like you." She paused. "People like you make it happen." He said nothing. "But tonight, you showed me something I didn't expect," she continued, "and I can't ignore it." When they reached a quiet alcove overlooking the ballroom, she turned to face him fully. "I don't know who you were before this job," she said, "but I know who you are now." He held her gaze, steady as ever. And the first threads of revelation, of public exposure, tightened around Marcus, around the donors, and around the night that had begun with laughter. The turning point had arrived. She stood facing him beneath the soft glow of the alcove lights, breathing steadily now, no longer trembling the way she had when Lucy first collapsed. But her eyes, those still carried the imprint of fear, gratitude, and 1,000 unanswered questions. He didn't fill the silence. He learned long ago that some people needed stillness more than explanations. "Who you are now," she repeated softly, as if grounding herself, "is someone I owe everything to." He shook his head gently. "You don't owe me anything." Harper let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "You saved her. You don't have to be modest about that." "It's not modesty," he said. "It's just, I don't want attention. I don't want people trying to guess who I used to be." She studied him, really studied him, and something changed in her expression. Not pity, recognition. "You're protecting someone," she murmured. His silence was confirmation enough. She softened, understanding without needing his full history. "Your daughter?" He nodded once. The moment held, warm, quiet, respectful. A kind of pause life rarely offered to people who spent their days behind service doors and utility corridors. But he couldn't linger in this world of chandeliers and hushed concern. He needed to get back to Rowan. "I should check on my daughter," he said. Harper blinked, suddenly remembering the small girl with the wooden snowflake pendant. "Of course, I'd like to thank her too. She must be waiting for you." "She is," he said, with a small, tired smile. They walked, together down the hallway, side by side, but each in their own thoughts. Harper walked like someone seeing the hotel differently for the first time. He walked like someone navigating a world he never planned to re-enter. When they reached the service-level stairs, she halted. "You go ahead," she said gently. "I'll wait here." He didn't ask why. He simply nodded and descended the steps. When he opened the break room door, Rowan lifted her head immediately. "Daddy?" "I'm here," he said, kneeling beside her. She reached for the snowflake. "Are we going home?" "Soon," he murmured. "I just need to talk to someone first." She nodded and leaned against him, resting her little head on his shoulder. The room felt safe again, grounded, more real than the ballroom ever could. He held her for another moment before standing. "I'll be right outside." Rowan resumed coloring, trusting his return the way she always did. He stepped into the hallway and found Harper exactly where he'd left her, hands clasped, eyes softened by something more than gratitude. She noticed the faint exhaustion in his expression, the kind that didn't come from saving a child, but from carrying years of quiet responsibility. "Is she all right?" Harper asked. "She's good," he said. "She's always good." A small smile touched Harper's lips. "She must love you very much. She's my whole world." Something in that truth hit Harper harder than expected. She swallowed, then spoke with unusual quietness. "Can I ask, why here? Why this job? With everything you clearly know how to do, why hide it?" He paused. Not defensively, not guardedly, thoughtfully. "Because I needed a place where nothing explodes, where the only thing I have to fix is a broken light or a stuck door." His voice dipped. "It's peaceful here. Rowan needs peaceful." Harper nodded slowly. "I understand." She did, more than he expected. She seemed to carry her own private storms behind her immaculate posture. Then she surprised him. Can I see her? Just for a moment?" Harper asked. He hesitated, not because he doubted her intentions, but because the worlds they came from rarely touched. But Rowan was kind, and Harper was genuine, and tonight had already tangled their lives together in ways none of them planned. He opened the break room door. Rowan looked up shyly at the tall woman entering behind him. Harper knelt in front of the girl, eyes soft. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm Harper." Rowan nodded, clutching her snowflake. "That's beautiful," Harper said gently. "Did you make it?" Rowan hesitated, then extended the wooden piece towards her. "It's for my mom, for Christmas." Harper froze, breath catching, realizing she'd stepped into a space deeper than she expected. "It's perfect," she whispered. He watched quietly, heart tightening. Rowan didn't often talk about her mother, but tonight she seemed to open a little. Harper rose slowly. "Thank you for letting me meet her," she said. He nodded. She lingered near him, as if trying to understand the shape of this man's quiet strength. Then she spoke again, softer, more personal. "I saw the way you held her upstairs," Harper murmured. "Not just with skill, with care, real care," she swallowed. "I don't think anyone's ever looked at a crisis the way you did." "I've seen worse," he said simply. "I believe you." Harper stepped a little closer. "And I don't think you're done with tonight's story. People are asking questions, not gossip, real questions. They're trying to understand the kind of person who doesn't hesitate when everyone else freezes." He didn't react. "And Marcus," she continued, "is trying to twist the narrative before the truth reaches them." There it was, the turning hinge of the victory strategy. He exhaled slowly. "He's afraid of losing control. And you," Harper said, voice steadier now, "are about to take control without even trying." He didn't move, didn't answer, but the shift had begun. The humiliation was ending. The exposure was coming, and the night wasn't finished with him yet. He stood there a moment longer, absorbing Harper's words, knowing she wasn't exaggerating. The narrative was shifting, tilting the ballroom on an axis he never asked to step onto. He glanced toward the stairwell that led back up to the gala floor. The faint hum of voices drifted down, restless and charged. The truth was rising, and Marcus was scrambling to shape it before it settled. But there was something steadier pulling him now. Rowan's presence warming the air behind him, Harper's sincerity softening the tension in front of him, and the undeniable reality that tonight had pushed him out of hiding whether he liked it or not. Harper straightened. "I think you should come back upstairs with me." He took a slow breath. "Why?" "Because people are forming their version of the story," she said, "and they're waiting for you. You deserve to choose how this night defines you, not Marcus." He didn't answer right away. Public exposure wasn't something he wanted. It wasn't comfort. But avoidance wouldn't protect Rowan from the whispers either. Better to shape the truth than let someone like Marcus shape the lie. He nodded once. "Stay close," Harper said gently. "If anyone has a right to stand beside the truth, it's you." He glanced back at Rowan. "5 minutes," he whispered to her. "I'll be right back." She nodded, trusting him without question. Then he followed Harper up the stairs. As they reached the ballroom side entrance, the murmurs swelled. Guests turned, some curious, some reverent, none dismissive. The moment he stepped back into the golden light, the shift was palpable. Hours ago, they looked at him and saw labor. Now they looked and saw capability, competence, courage. Marcus felt it first. He was near the bar, shoulders tight, face pale. His eyes widened at the sight of Harper and him walking side by side, and he quickly excused himself from the cluster of donors he was trying and failing to convince. He pushed through the crowd, intercepting them halfway into the room. "You can't seriously be entertaining all this," Marcus said sharply. "He's not who people think he is. You're letting the adrenaline confuse you." Harper's voice was ice. "Marcus, not tonight." He bristled. "You don't know him." "And you do?" she shot back. Marcus opened his mouth, but the crowd around them had already shifted. People moved closer, not to corner him, but to protect the man he'd spent the night underestimating. The donors, the choir parents, the hotel guests, they stood like witnesses ready for the next page. A woman from the donor table spoke first. "We saw what he did. We saw you do nothing." Another added, You tried to stop him from helping that child. Marcus flushed. I didn't. You tried to strip him of authority he clearly had, someone else interrupted. Marcus's eyes darted desperately, his position slipping through his fingers. You're all reacting emotionally, he said, trying to regain control. Look at him. He's maintenance. He doesn't belong in conversations like these. Harper stiffened. And yet, he's the only one who belonged in the moment that mattered. Marcus scoffed. You don't even know his background. Maybe I don't need to, Harper replied. Maybe the world isn't built from background checks. Maybe it's built from what people do when the moment calls for them. A hush fell over the crowd. He didn't step forward to defend himself. He didn't need to. The truth was traveling faster than Marcus could chase it. Then one of the choir parents spoke up. My son told me he saw the way you moved. He said you took control like a doctor. The ballroom murmured again. Marcus snapped, He's not a doctor, And that was the moment the medic reappeared at the doorway. The young man stepped in, scanning the room before his eyes landed squarely on him. Sir, the medic called, loud enough for everyone to hear. The hospital asked me to thank you again. They identified the swelling pattern. You caught it early enough to prevent a full obstruction. You saved that girl's life. Silence. Then a wave of breath, soft and stunned. Marcus was the only one who didn't breathe. Harper's expression softened with gravity. The donors stepped back, not away from him, but away from Marcus. The medic continued. Just for the record, most trained responders wouldn't have recognized that breathing pattern in time, not without years of field experience. He nodded respectfully. You did, Marcus sputtered. This means nothing. Anyone could have... No, the medic said firmly. Not anyone. The ballroom shifted again, the ground tilting firmly away from Marcus. Harper looked around, then at the man beside her. There, she whispered. That's the truth. That's what they needed to hear. The attention moved back to him, not as spectacle, but as recognition. He didn't bow his head or step back. He simply accepted the moment with quiet dignity. But victory strategy required more. Tonight wasn't just about truth. It was about flipping the humiliation into undeniable respect. So he stepped forward just enough to make his voice heard. Lucy is safe, he said. That's what matters. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But the room leaned into it. Harper nodded at him, eyes warm. Come with me, she said softly. There's one more place you need to stand. He followed her through the ballroom, past the donors, past the choir, past Marcus shrinking beneath the weight of his own arrogance. When they reached the threshold leading back to the lounge, the place where he was rejected hours ago, Harper stopped. Here, she whispered, this is where your night really changes. And the reversal began. By the way, if you're still here, subscribe with the bell on. This story has so much more unfolding, and you don't want to miss the next turn. He paused at the threshold of the lounge, the very place where his night had collapsed just hours earlier. He hadn't forgotten the laughter, the sting, the tin of cookies still untouched in Rowan's little hands. The expensive drinks, the polished tables, the quiet cruelty disguised as holiday cheer. He remembered all of it. Harper stood beside him now, anchoring the moment with the weight of everything that had changed. The ballroom behind them hummed with shifting loyalties, but this room was the battlefield of his humiliation. It was fitting that the reversal would start exactly here. Harper gestured subtly for him to enter. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "Just stand here with me. Let them see who you are now." He stepped forward, breath steady, shoulders collected in the calm that had carried him through battlefields far worse than this decorated lounge. The donors who'd followed out of curiosity or reverence drifted in behind Harper, forming a small cluster. The staff lingered along the periphery. Marcus hovered several feet away, pale and stiff, realizing the ground he once claimed ownership of had shifted beneath him. One of the choir mothers approached Harper first. "We were all terrified," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do, but he—" She turned towards him with genuine admiration. He saw everything. He understood before anyone else even recognized she was in trouble. Her sincerity wasn't performative. It was relief personified. He dipped his head politely, but he didn't bask in it. Praise wasn't something he'd ever chased. Another guest stepped forward, a man in a charcoal suit with silver hair. "I've spent 30 years funding medical research," the man said, "and I've never seen someone react that fast. The medic said you trained him." He didn't respond, not verbally. He didn't need to. A silence settled again, but this time it wasn't judgment. It was respect, thick and warm. Harper stood slightly ahead of him, voice calm but clear enough for those nearby to hear. He didn't hesitate. While the rest of us froze, he stepped in. "My niece is stable because of him." Marcus stiffened. "You're all forgetting he's hiding something. You're being dazzled." A few guests exchanged annoyed glances. Harper didn't even turn toward Marcus. "We're not being dazzled. We're recognizing what we witnessed." The man in the charcoal suit added, "It takes years of specialized training to do what he did. Marcus, do you have any idea how foolish you sound right now?" Marcus tried to retort, but the words caught in his throat. He looked around and found no allies, only eyes that finally saw him clearly. For the first time all evening, Marcus didn't look powerful. He looked exposed. This was the turn public exposure depended on. Not a spotlight, not fame, just truth, overwhelming arrogance. Still, the moment wasn't complete, not yet. Harper took a step forward, addressing the cluster of witnesses. "I was terrified," she said openly. "When Lucy fell, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what to do. But he—" Her gaze softened as she turned to him. He didn't even hesitate. He came to her like he'd done it 1,000 times. A whisper from the back. "Maybe he has." He didn't react, though his spine tightened at the accuracy of it. Harper faced the guests again. "I work in a world where credentials, titles, resumes, they're everything. But tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he knew what to do when my niece couldn't breathe." Her voice wavered. "And he didn't wait for permission." Another donor nodded. "A real hero doesn't wait for permission." Marcus scoffed in frustration, stepping forward as if trying to reclaim authority. "You're all acting like he's some decorated savior. He's hiding behind that uniform." The same choir mother turned to him sharply. "No, you were hiding behind your suit." The room rippled with agreement. Harper met Marcus's glare head on. "You stopped him earlier. You tried to prevent him from helping Lucy. Remember that." Marcus flinched. Harper wasn't finished. "And you tried to humiliate him tonight. But humiliation only works when you're right about someone." Her voice sharpened. "You weren't." The victory strategy clicked into place. Public reversal, witnessed by everyone who'd seen his initial rejection. He didn't need to speak. Harper's words did the job. The lounge felt different now. Not a place of ridicule, but a place of reckoning. Light glinted off the gold-trimmed garlands, reflecting the shifting power in the room. A staff member stepped closer, speaking timidly at first. We always knew he was different, calm, like he'd lived through more than any of us. A man beside her nodded. You don't move like that unless you've seen real emergencies. Marcus tried one last attempt at defense. You're all judging me unfairly. No, Harper interrupted calmly, turning toward him with the full weight of authority she used in courtrooms. We're judging you accurately. Marcus froze, chest heaving with anger he couldn't release without turning the entire room fully against him. Harper looked back at him, at the man who tried to shrink himself all evening, who let humiliation slide off him without complaint, and her voice softened just slightly. Come with me, she said quietly. He frowned. Where? Back to where your night changed. Her eyes drifted to the lounge table where his blind date had stood and walked away. We're not done. He followed her because something inside him understood that walking away now would undo the shift that had taken root. Guests parted as they walked, some nodding, some watching in thoughtful silence, all aware that the man they'd dismissed was now the quiet center of gravity. Marcus was left alone near the bar, staring at the empty seat where his confidence used to be. This wasn't the end. This was the hinge moment, the final rise before the public crescendo. Tonight's reversal hadn't fully arrived, but momentum was already building toward it, and the ballroom could feel it. He followed Harper across the lounge, each step carrying him deeper into the same space where humiliation had settled on his shoulders only hours earlier. The soft glow of Christmas lights reflected in the polished marble floors, the clinking glasses, the murmured conversations, they were all still there. But the way people looked at him had changed. Where there had been smirks, there were measured nods. Where there had been dismissive glances, there were eyes filled with something closer to respect or wonder. Yet none of that felt like triumph. It felt heavy, complicated, unwanted, necessary. Harper stopped near the table where his blind date had walked away from him, the table where Marcus had first laughed. She touched the chair lightly with her fingers, the gesture almost symbolic. This is where they made the mistake, she said quietly. He didn't respond. The memory was still sharp enough without her naming it. Harper inhaled slowly, gathering herself. I want to understand, she continued. Tonight I saw you help Lucy with precision, calm, decisive, confident. But earlier, when they mocked you, you didn't defend yourself. You didn't say a word. Why? He shifted his weight, eyes settling on the garland hanging above the lounge entrance. Because I've wasted too many years defending who I am to people who don't care. Harper blinked, taken aback by the honesty. He went on, voice steady. People see the uniform and think that's the whole story. That's fine. I don't have the energy to correct everyone. But you corrected life tonight, Harper whispered. Not them. Life. That matters. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked around the lounge, taking in the spot where Rowan's cookie tin had rested on the table. She had decorated it with tiny stars to make it look fancy. He remembered how his date recoiled from it, from him, from the idea of being seen with someone who didn't fit the polished world she wanted to project. That sting hadn't been for himself. It had been for his daughter. Harper followed his gaze. They were wrong about you, she said. All of them, including me. He turned slightly toward her, not fully, but enough. that she knew she had his attention. "You didn't do anything to me," he said. "But I didn't notice you," she replied softly. "And I should have. Not because of what you did tonight, because you're a person worth noticing." A quiet hum settled between them, weighted with sincerity. Then Harper took a small step closer. "Tell me something honestly. Are you hiding because you're protecting your daughter, or because you're trying to protect yourself?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't prying. She was seeing. He exhaled slowly. "When I left the Air Force, I wasn't the same man I used to be. I didn't want my daughter growing up around the pieces I couldn't fix. I needed a place where life felt simple again, where the only thing I had to worry about was her. That's why I'm here." "And maintenance work gives you that sense of control," Harper said gently. "Exactly." She nodded, letting the truth settle. "But tonight wasn't simple. It wasn't quiet. And you stepped into the chaos anyway." He looked down briefly, remembering Lucy's trembling breaths, Harper's panic, the pressure that forced him to act before thought. "Some instincts don't go away." Harper swallowed, her voice dropping lower. "Does Rowan know who you used to be?" "She knows I helped people once," he said. "She doesn't know the details. She doesn't need to." Harper nodded, absorbing every word. Before either of them could speak again, a small group of guests drifted closer, not intruding, but waiting respectfully. The tension in the air shifted, signaling the next stage of the public reversal. Harper straightened, then turned slightly toward them. "Give us a moment," she asked. They stepped back without hesitation. She faced him again. "They want to hear you speak. They want your version. They want to understand the man who saved a life tonight." He shook his head. "I don't want to be a spectacle." "You're not," she insisted. "You're the truth in a room full of assumptions." He exhaled again, weary. "I didn't come here tonight for this." "I know," Harper whispered, "but the girl who collapsed is my niece. I owe you her life. And I don't want Marcus shaping who you are to these people." He stiffened slightly at that. Harper stepped even closer. "If you walk away, he wins. He gets to spin the narrative, paint you small, erase what you did." The truth of that landed thicker than any compliment. She continued, "But if you stand here, if you let them see you with your own quiet strength, then what happened in that ballroom will matter, and what happened in this lounge earlier will be rewritten." He lowered his gaze, considering. Her logic cut clean, not manipulative, not demanding, just true. Harper softened, voice almost a whisper. "You told me you protect your daughter. Let people see who she's being raised by." That line struck him deepest. He met her eyes fully for the first time since they reached the lounge. "All right," he said quietly. Harper exhaled, almost in relief. "Then let's finish what the night started." She guided him toward the center of the lounge, where the guests' curiosity had thickened into anticipation. Marcus lingered further back, the weight of the room pressing against him like a verdict waiting to be delivered. He stopped in the middle, the same place he had stood earlier in humiliation. Only now, the eyes around him weren't mocking. They were waiting. And the victory strategy began knitting itself tighter around the unfolding truth. This wasn't the final reversal, but it was the step before the final rise. He stood at the center of the lounge, the same polished floor where hours earlier he'd watched a blind date turn her back on him, while strangers chuckled behind their cocktails. But now the room didn't feel cruel. It felt charged, like everyone here understood they were witnessing something shifting, something correcting itself. Harper moved to his side, not in front of him, not behind him, but beside him, anchoring him with a presence that was steady, intentional, and quietly protective. The donors formed a semicircle, giving him space without stepping back into indifference. Staff members watched from the doorway. The choir parents huddled near the wall, eyes still softened with gratitude. Even the hotel manager lingered nearby, uncertain but attentive. Only Marcus stood apart, stiff and furious, gripping his glass so tightly the ice inside trembled. Harper spoke first, not to shield him, but to open the space. "Tonight started one way," she said, her voice lifting just enough to reach the room. "And it's ending very differently." The lounge fell silent. "Most of you saw what happened," she continued. "A little girl collapsed. Panic spread. And this man," she gestured toward him, "stepped forward when no one else could." He didn't shift, didn't look at the crowd. His focus remained steady, his breath calm. He wasn't here to bask in attention. He was here because Harper was right. Walking away would have handed Marcus the final word. And Rowan deserved better than a world where arrogance defined truth. A donor stepped forward. "We'd like to hear your version," he said. "Not rumors, not guesses. Just what happened." He took a slow breath. "Lucy was in respiratory distress," he said. "She needed her airway stabilized. I recognized the signs and reacted." A woman asked, "How did you know what kind of breathing pattern it was?" His answer was simple. "I've seen it before." Another voice, gentler this time. "Did you work in medicine?" He paused. Harper watched him closely, understanding the crossroads forming in the air. The silence stretched for a moment, heavy, but not uncomfortable. "Yes," he said finally. "A long time ago." The crowd leaned in, not physically, but emotionally, waiting for more. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The medic's recognition, the speed of his response, the precision, it all spoke for him. And Harper knew, with absolute clarity, that protecting the details wasn't secrecy. It was survival. Marcus, however, couldn't resist the crack in the door. "So that's it," he snapped. "You toss out some vague history and everyone falls at your feet? He's hiding something. People don't give up careers like that unless they've done something wrong." The room recoiled, a collective breath of disgust. Harper turned toward Marcus slowly. "And you give up compassion with ease," she said. "Which one sounds like the real problem?" The choir mother stepped forward. "My son told me that when he saw the little girl fall, he froze. He said he'll never forget how you didn't." A donor added, "You saved that child. No job title changes that." Another said, "Tonight your uniform didn't define your worth. Your actions did." At that, something inside him tightened. Not pain, not pride, but a deep, quiet ache. Because for years he had trained himself to shrink, to stay invisible, to keep the world from expecting too much from him. But tonight didn't ask for invisibility. Tonight demanded presence. Harper stepped closer to him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Let them see you," she whispered. "Just this once." He didn't turn his head, but he spoke. "I didn't come here to prove anything. I came to work, to take care of my daughter. That's all I need." "Maybe," Harper said softly, "but tonight you did more than work. You gave a child a future." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet. Something deeper, recognition layered with shared understanding. Two people who lived in different worlds but understood fear the same way. Harper stepped forward to address the room again. What happened tonight wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It wasn't an accident. It was someone stepping up because he knew how. The donors nodded, murmuring agreement. Marcus tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "You're all blinded. He's just—" "No," Harper said sharply, turning toward him. "You're blinded by your need to feel superior, and that ends tonight." Marcus froze, mouth still open, but no words emerging. A new voice rose behind them, soft, tentative, but familiar. "Daddy?" He turned. Rowan stood in the doorway of the break room, wooden snowflake clutched in her hands, eyes wide but calm. The scene shifted instantly, the room softening, people turning toward the child whose quiet presence pulled him back into focus. He went to her, kneeling. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded, then held out the snowflake. "I finished it." The room watched a moment, so intimate it felt almost sacred. The briachard wooden snowflake, carved with imperfect edges and colored with care, became the symbolic thread crossing the night, from humiliation to healing. Harper knelt beside Rowan. "May I see it?" she asked. Rowan hesitated, then nodded shyly. Harper touched the snowflake gently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Something settled in the air, an understanding that the man everyone now admired wasn't defined by past titles, but by the life he built now, one centered around a little girl with a wooden snowflake. Harper rose. "Let's go back," she said softly. "Everyone is waiting." He stood, Rowan holding his hand tightly. The crowd parted as they moved toward the ballroom again, all eyes drawn to the quiet man who'd walked into the night as a nobody, and now walked with the gravity of someone whose truth had finally surfaced. Public exposure was no longer approaching. It had arrived. He walked back into the ballroom with Rowan's hand tucked firmly in his, Harper guiding them through the parted crowd. The shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. Hours ago, he'd entered this room as a quiet maintenance worker, ignored by everyone except the few who needed him to move something or fix something. Now every pair of eyes followed him with a mixture of respect, awe, and something deeper, gratitude. The light seemed softer, the music gentler, as though the room itself understood that this was no longer the same night. Harper slowed her pace, letting him step beside her, not behind. Rowan, sensing the change without understanding the details, held her snowflake close to her chest. She scanned the crowd with the unbroken trust only a child could possess. Her father squeezed her hand gently, grounding her and himself at the same time. Several donors approached cautiously, stopping just close enough to signal deference. The silver-haired doctor from earlier spoke first. "They released an update from the hospital," he said. "Lucy's breathing is stable. They're crediting the early intervention." Harper inhaled shakily, emotion tightening her throat. That intervention was his. A ripple of agreement traveled through the cluster around them, but instead of crowding him, they gave him space, an instinctive acknowledgement of his boundaries, something no one had thought to offer earlier. Marcus, however, couldn't accept the shift. He pushed forward through the group, his face red and rigid with humiliation. "So that's it," he demanded. "He gets to be some kind of hero? You're all acting like he's—" Harper stepped between them before he could finish. "Careful," she warned softly. "This isn't a conversation you can win." The steadiness in her voice was enough to silence the room. Marcus's lips curled. "You're all fools. You don't know anything about him." "Maybe we don't need to," Harper replied, "because tonight, what he did was more important than whatever you're digging. For in the dark," the weight of her words settled heavy and undeniable. Marcus faltered, unable to hide the fact that the room was no longer his stage. Then a voice rose from the right. "Sir," it was the young medic again, breathless from hurrying across the floor. He held a small envelope in his hand. "The hospital sent this for you," he said. "They said it's not official protocol, but they wanted it delivered immediately." The medic extended the envelope. He hesitated before taking it. The front read, "To the man who saved a child tonight." Inside was a simple note. "Thank you. You recognized what others missed. Lucy will go home because of you." There was no signature, no titles, just truth in ink. He folded the note carefully, tucking it into Rowan's coat pocket as if giving the gratitude a safer home. The medic lingered only long enough to nod respectfully before stepping back. And with that, the room shifted again. Not in awe this time, but in understanding. The crowd wasn't seeing a miracle. They were seeing a man who'd spent years unseen. Harper's breath eased subtly. "This," she said softly, "is the part of the night where you let the world meet the version of you you've been hiding." He didn't respond, not with words. He just stood taller, not boasting, not claiming, simply existing without shrinking. A choir mother approached Rowan with a gentle smile. "Would you like to hang your snowflake on the big tree?" she asked. Rowan's eyes widened. She looked up at him for permission. "Go ahead," he whispered. Harper guided Rowan toward the towering Christmas tree near the room's center, where lights twinkled like small promises. He watched his daughter choose a spot carefully, her little hand sliding the wooden snowflake onto a branch. When she stepped back, the snowflake caught the light, glowing as though it belonged there. Just like him, Harper realized. Rowan hurried back and hugged his leg, pride glowing in her eyes. "It looks good, Daddy." "It does," he whispered. Then Harper faced him fully, stepping close enough for only him to hear. "Earlier tonight," she said, "I saw a man rejected as if his worth meant nothing, and now I see who you truly are." He didn't look away. For once he didn't downplay, deflect, or shrink into the background. "What do you see?" he asked quietly. Harper exhaled slowly. A man who didn't need this room to believe in him. But somehow, this room needed him. The truth of it settled warm across his shoulders. She continued, softer still. "And someone I'd like to know better, if you'll let me." He blinked, the offering unexpected, but genuine. "You don't even know me." "I know enough to start," she murmured. Before either of them could say more, Rowan tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy?" "Yes?" "Can we stay for the cookies now?" He laughed, a quiet, warm sound that Harper hadn't heard from him yet. "Yeah," he said. "This time, we can stay." And for the first time all night, the lounge no longer felt like a place of humiliation. It felt like a place of beginning. He wasn't a ghost in the background anymore. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't trapped between past and present. He was simply seen. And that was enough. If you felt every turn of this journey, make sure you like the video, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell, so you never miss the next story that pulls you all the way in.